Isn't that terrible? But it is true.
Yeah.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the last class of Shaping the Communion. At this point, I'm not even really certain it's 5 vignettes because I'm doing like at least 6 different stories that all kind of play into the founding of what we know of the communion today. But, yes. Again, recap, here's the definition from the Episcopal Dictionary of what the Anglican or Anglicanism is. I will read the last part just because it seems more fitting to what we're talking about today. At the end of the 19th century, however, Anglicanism began to take a new identity. The national churches, which derived from the Church of England, became more conscious of their own identity while remaining in communion with the See of Canterbury. They also retained a common Anglican theological and ecclesial identity. Anglicanism is now a worldwide family of churches which share a common theological heritage and polity. And so, again, canon trucks, change and continuity, something old, something new, bonds and boundaries, autonomy and interdependence, rules and relationships, honoring truth, honoring unity. We will be seeing how hard honoring unity can be sometimes. At least we'll be talking about it. But again, some brief recap. Augustine of Canterbury, kind of where I argue the Anglican Church started in Anglican theology, with his correspondence with Pope Gregory the Great, kind of laying the groundwork for the Via Media, with Pope Gregory encouraging him to take what he found in the Celtic or Gallican Church and his own tradition, the Roman Church, and making what is most pleasing towards God. Class 2, we talked about Becket and Henry VIII. Thomas Becket was murdered by Henry II, possibly directly or indirectly, but they fought quite a bit during his episcopacy, archiepiscopacy, and Henry's reign, and resulted in the church winning over authority over the English crown, and Henry VIII, the opposite happened. Henry VIII needed a divorce to secure the Tudor family line because he wanted a male heir, because it was a lot easier generally for male heirs to take the throne and not have to share power with their spouse. So he wanted to divorce his first wife, didn't get it from the Pope, so he's formed his own church. He said, "I am the head of the church." Yep. Edward and Elizabeth. Edward kind of did, under Edward's reign, debatable if Edward did as much reforming at 9 years old, but Kramer said he was quite the reformer. But the church from Henry's time to Edward's time took a huge reformed swing towards it, reformed as in Calvinism. And you can see that first in the differences between the 2 books of common prayer that came out during Edward's reign. So there was a swing towards Reformed theology, but it's still called the Eucharist, the Mass. We saw the development of morning and evening prayer, changed to emphasizing justification by faith and the theology of predestination, and made the sacrifice in Eucharist not a sacrifice that we are making in the church right at that moment, but a remembrance of Christ's one sacrifice on the cross. And it was not received well. There's literally a riot and a whole mini revolution because of it. 1552 came and went even further into the Reformed, removed anointing, exorcisms, blessings, went to a stricter liturgical wear, so they were no longer allowed to wear copes or chasubles. They were to wear what we would call choir dress, cassock, the white surplice, and then a tippet or sometimes a stole if doing Eucharist. One thing that did change was it placed emphasis on public baptism, which we still hold true today. And one, I guess with this book, it did not have a long time to really be felt by the people. Edward died about 9 months into this becoming used in public, in which his sister, Mary, took over after he died 12 days later. She was a Catholic from Henry's first wife, and she returned England to Rome, or was in the process of doing it, but she only had a 5-year reign, died probably from cancer. And because she had no heirs with her husband, who was the King of Spain, Elizabeth took over. She is a result of Henry's second marriage to Anne Boleyn. She had a 45-year reign, and she took a much more moderate stance on religion. As stated, the Via Media took its full development under her. Yes, I thought this was great. I love that picture, even though the Via Media was, and all of the legislation that went into it, there was a comment about this picture of Queen Elizabeth, of just how tired she looks. I loved it because, she's holding the two sides of the church together. But a lot of that work happened early on in her reign, within the first 7 years. All of it was done. But there is a quote attributed to her that she had no desire to make a window into men's souls. She did not care what you believed. She just wanted you to worship together. So trying to find the middle way. Was it successful? Debatably. In Elizabeth's time, yes, it does seem to be quite successful. There's only one revolt during her reign, and it was quite minor, not very different compared to the rest of the mainland. I would say it becomes quite debatable after Elizabeth, because there was much more fighting with people who wanted to go back to the Catholic Church, people who were fine with what their church was now, and people who wanted to become more Calvinistic, who we call Puritans. And so there's a lot of fighting between the Crown and Puritans over how far the church should go, removing bishops, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a long, complex battle, of which one king lost his head, Charles I, and then there had to be a whole restoration of the monarchy. So it's debatable how effective it was during other people's reign. And then last week, we actually talked about the founding of our church, the Episcopal Church. So I did have to go into a brief thing of the Scottish Episcopal Church, how they are different, and I would argue did not break off of the off the Church of England, is because they were kind of in development at the exact same time as the Church of England. James the Sixth and First, he was monarch of both England and Scotland. The Sixth of Scotland, the First of England. He wanted bishops in the Church of Scotland because they were taking a much more Presbyterian polity, so being ruled by sessions and groups of elders, because Presbyterian means elder. Technically, I'm a presbyter. I'm an elder. Fun terms because we translate things 7 times. But that's why there's 100 different terms for everything in the church. But anyway, he wanted bishops. So then there's a ton of infighting between Presbyterians in Scotland and Episcopalians, because they would call themselves Episcopalians, that bishops were ruling the church until James the VII and II took the power. He was a Catholic, wanted to return England back to the Catholic Church. That didn't sit well after the restoration of the monarchy because they wanted a Protestant church and they wanted to retain their Protestant church. So William and Mary, both heirs to the throne from Charles II, or had some call, Mary more so than William, but they both had some sort of call or claim to the throne in England, got an army, went into the UK, and James fled, threw his Great Seal in the Thames, and left for France. But that caused issues because Parliament in both Scotland and England claimed that he abdicated the throne, James. And there's all of the bishops in Scotland and about 7 bishops in England stated he did not abdicate. There's no such, he does not have a written law stating of his abdication. So they got removed from office. The Presbyterians took over in Scotland, and Scotland has been Presbyterian ever since. And all these bishops would start doing their church underground effectively. It became illegal for them to do any worship, to have more than 5 people, to serve and minister towards more than 5 people at any given moment. For conspiracy reasons, there was laws against them. They became tolerated, so they could actually minister, but still had a lot of the penal thing of they couldn't hold open church services. They still did. It was a challenge. That didn't really change, we'll talk in that a bit, until the end of the 18th century. In the 13 colonies, we kind of have 2 concurrent founding stories. Effectively, it was complicated for Anglican clergy in the 13 colonies because most of them sided with the crown. They all had to take oaths to the crown, and they took their oaths seriously. So the sole exception was more in southern states who were more than okay to side with the revolution, and the legislators in the established southern colonies, established as in they made the Church of England or the Anglican Church the state church, forced them to, instead of praying to the king, pray towards the Continental Congress and the patriots on the battlefield. But nearing the end of the war, it just became clear that there needed to be bishops so that they could start working on their own church. And 2 things started happening concurrently. First, though, was Samuel Seabury, who gathered clergy together in secret because this was the Church of England was not the established Church of Connecticut. The Congregational Church, so the Puritan Church, was the established Church of Connecticut, gathered Anglican clergy in secret. They elected him bishop, and so he first went to England to go get consecrated bishop. They refused for 2 reasons. The odd nature of his election to be bishop, because it was a secret meeting in a colony that did not have the Church of England as the established church, and he would still be required to take the oath of allegiance to the king as bishop. And while we had not won yet, it was pretty clear that we were going to win it was clear that we were going to win by 1783, barely still in the war. So Seabury went up to the Scottish Episcopal Church. They made a concordant with him stating that he needed to use the prayer book influenced by the 1549 prayer book, and hoped to instill a more Scottish-style polity, because at this point, the Scottish bishops no longer had archbishops. They would just name someone the primus or the primate. So he became bishop, styled himself the Bishop of all America, because the Archbishop of Canterbury's style is the primate of all England. The Archbishop of York is the primate of England. Confusing, but c'est la vie. And a big difference with Seabury is he is what is considered high church, in that he had a high respect for the historic episcopacy and believed that power should be located in the clergy of the church rather than with laity or shared with laity. In the mid-Atlantic and southern colonies, something different was happening. A cleric in Maryland called for a general synod to talk about further supporting the churches for mission work, developing structures of gathering and meeting, and they called that a convention. And from this, a cleric named William White in Philadelphia argued that what happened in Maryland should be in every single colony, to have them all make their own conventions or synods, and that they should meet every 3 years in a general convention to adopt resolutions, plan, appoint bishops, et cetera, and to make a new prayer book. So the first general convention met in 1785 and 86. They adopted resolutions that would make the foundings of these general conventions in their own authority, and they elected 3 people to become bishops. And it's important that they elected 3, because you need 3 bishops to make a bishop. During the consecration of a bishop, 3 bishops have to lay hands on the new bishop. That is the act that makes them. Where I only had 1 bishop lay their hands on me to make me a priest and a deacon, to consecrate a bishop, you need 3. One issue came up, though, is that David Griffith of Virginia did not have the funds to get himself to England. So only William White, the one who kind of called for this whole polity is the term for church governance, developed this whole thing, and Samuel Provost made it to England. And at the same time, England passed a law, because we had won the war at this point, that stated English or American clergy did not have to say the oath of allegiance. And they gave us, the Church of England gave us 2 bishops from the Church of England. They developed, but they had to get rid of the prayer book that they developed. England thought it was too far of a move, so they threw that out. But because the involvement in these general conventions involved laity, and they had a much wishy-washy take of how the church is structured, not through the historic episcopacy, but through association with other like-minded churches, we would consider them low church. Here's the quick guide. High church is not synonymous with Anglo-Catholic. All Anglo-Catholics, though, are high church. Term described opposition to the Calvinist Puritan wing, stressed the historic episcopacy, saw ministry through the sacraments as primary, and generally preferred clergy only over lay involvement. So they cared much more about clergy making decisions in the church rather than having clergy and lay people together. Low church was a term developed in opposition to high church, saw value in other denominations, minimized the authority of the episcopacy, stretched preaching over the sacraments, saw lay involvement as a good thing and encouraged it. John Wesley would be considered a low church. He never left the Church of England. We kind of kicked him out. And they stressed individualism, the personal religious experience, and conversion by the Holy Spirit. So we now have 3 bishops ordained, 1 from Scotland and 2 from the Church of England. They needed to make something work. There was a bitter rivalry between Provost White, mostly between Provost and Seabury. White was kind of the intermediate, and when the 1789 convention came about and Provost could not attend, so a whole house of bishops of 3 people and one could not attend, White made a ton of concessions to Seabury and got Seabury's churches in New England to come and join the General Convention officially. They made a new prayer book in 1789, and that was the prayer book for nearly 100 years, and developed a bicameral General Convention with a House of Bishops and a House of Laity, or deputies, where priests and lay people would have their say in the General Convention, and a House of Bishops. And it made the presiding bishop rotate every 2 years, which I found kind of odd because the conventions were triennial. So the next one was not going to be until 82. But anyway, that is how the Episcopal Church actually formed, was kind of this hodgepodge of different consecrations, and that's why our shield is also this way. The white and red is the cross of St. George, and the blue and white is the cross of St. Andrew. So St. George is of England, St. Andrew is Scotland, and then there's 9 crosses for the 9 original dioceses of the Episcopal Church. But it took quite some time for there to be enough steam. All of these pre-revolution and during revolution leaders aged out, and most of the churches were held in secret during the revolution, that there was a severe lack of leadership, and a lot of churches closed for the Episcopal Church. Like Georgia only had 1 functional church in 1792, but it was technically a whole diocese. So it took some time for a lot of this to kind of come together and start up. So some things to remember: where is authority? Is it, in our case, is it General Convention, bishops, the people, all up for debate, and General Convention being the highest authority in the Episcopal Church took about 15 General Conventions before that became the end-all be-all. Via media, between Low and High Church, the High Church of New England and the Low Church of the Mid-Atlantic and Southern states, clergy laity as well. What is the historic episcopacy? At this time, was Scotland's line considered correct or proper or uninterrupted? That was up for debate. And how would one verify that? And what is our relationship to England and the Scottish Episcopal Church? All of that was up for grabs during that time. And so now today's class, the sisterhood of churches. That's generally how we refer to ourselves in the Anglican Communion, other than the mother church of the Church of England. And this is a picture of the primates meeting of 2016. Right behind Justin Welby in the center is Michael Curry, our former presiding bishop, who left, I guess, just over a year and a half ago. His term ended. We now elect PBs for a 9-year term. And so these are all of the heads of the Anglican churches around the world, at least as of 2016. I couldn't find a modern one. And I mean, Sarah has had none yet. She officially started the job a week ago. Yep. Okay. So the first bond. So as I briefly went over again with the Scottish Episcopal Church, they were tolerated in 1711. They were still under penal laws, which limited the number of people they could minister to at one time and other such things. The last Jacobite pretender died in 1789. So the last person who came from James VII and II died. And so the Scottish Episcopalians agreed to pray for George III in 1792. And so with that, George had Parliament remove the final penal codes, so that regularized the relationship between the Church of England and the Scottish Episcopal Church. So that was the first time where the bishops in the Church of England recognized the bishops and could build relationships with the bishops in Scotland, even though they were not the established Church of Scotland. So the primitive church. In 1835, John Henry Hopkins, this guy right here, wrote a book called The Primitive Church, and in it he argued that the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Communion, or the Anglican Church as a whole, looked probably more like how the ancient church did, in that bishops and general synods ruled instead of one person, the Pope, ruling over the entirety of the church. And in it, he kind of called for all bishops who were Anglican to see each other as equals and to meet in synod. Synod is just a fancy term for a church meeting. And called for Anglicans around the world to meet the same way. So by 1835, there's already the sense of what is our relationship with the Church of England. At this time, the Episcopal Church would accept Anglican clergy without any hesitation, but the Church of England would not for Americans. And I mean, we're also working with our Anglican siblings to the north of us in Canada. They received their own first bishop around the same time we had our own first bishop. So what is our relationship to them? If a Canadian came to the US, do we recognize their ordinations? Do we recognize their own ministry? That became questionable. I know some dioceses would, especially around the Canadian border, would send bishops across the border to do confirmations and stuff like that. But so John Henry Hopkins later on would then petition General Convention every year in the House of Bishops to write to the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Archbishop of Armagh. It's the Irish name. I don't know, Armagh, and the Primus of Scotland, that we should all have some sort of meeting to talk about this. Like, what is our relationship? What should it be? And he also became presiding bishop. During this time, after Seabury, White, and Provost, the most senior bishop, so the person who's reigned the longest as bishop, became the presiding bishop of the church. Nothing special. You were just the longest serving bishop, so you get the job. At the same time, the Church of England changed from how they interacted with 13 colonies and would start giving colonies their own bishops around the world as the empire expanded. South Africa received quite a few early bishops just from the number of people going to South Africa. And this guy right here, Robert Gray, was the first bishop of Cape Town. And he saw himself as the senior bishop in the South African colony and region, generally of having more power than he actually did. So there's this case called the Privy Council decision of Long v. Bishop of Cape Town. He had a priest refusing to send laity and himself going to a synod that this priest felt like he did not, and so he punished this priest. coercively. And effectively, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council dictated that he had no such authority because the Church of England was not the established church of the colony of Cape Town. So he did not have coercive legal power under his authority as the Bishop of Cape Town. And so he could not exercise that power because they were an association of religious folks. That's how the Privy Council was kind of defining anything that was not the established church. So effectively, Church of England clergy outside of England did not have the same legal rights or powers that they did inside of England. And so that kind of weakened the bishop's power in the colonies because what they said no longer had any force of law. And so it undermined Grey's power. And kind of during and shortly after, there was this issue with this man, who's John Colenso. He was the Bishop of Natal in South Africa from 1853 to 1883, so 30 years. And he became controversial quite immediately. One is because he was quite supportive of the KwaZulus. He saw them, I guess it's technically wrong to say he saw them as people, but he did see them as earning respect. I read something, this was on Wikipedia, but he saw Africans as a different race, but still deserved respect and dignity. His thoughts were disproven scientifically, but that's the one mark. He did feel like how the British were treating the KwaZulus was not right. He was more accepting on polygamy. He would not ordain or allow for a second marriage if someone was already Christian, but he refused to have second, third, and plus numbered wives from KwaZulu peoples to be dismissed if they converted to Christianity. So he allowed them to still be in polygamy, even though that was against traditional marriage. So that caused some issues. He was also learning isiZulu and translated the Bible and the prayer book into isiZulu and used KwaZulu peoples to help him change it so that it made sense and used idioms of the KwaZulu people, which caused some controversy as well. And then he also began to have some diverging biblical interpretations. So he had two primary books, a commentary on the Epistle of the Romans, and there's a section in it where he felt that the ancestors of the KwaZulu people who never heard the word of Scripture, even though the traditional understanding of Romans thought that they would be deemed into eternal damnation for never converting, he felt that was wrong, so that caused an issue. And then a critical examination of the Pentateuch. Pentateuch is the Greek term for Torah. And he argued of the historical accuracy of, or argued against, he believed that the Pentateuch had no historical accuracy. So there is nothing historical about the first 5 books of the Bible, and that caused quite a big issue, and Robert Grey did not like it. When Colenso was back in England sorting some things out, visiting family, etc., because his father was also a bishop in England. Robert Gray assembled a church synod in court to try the bishop for heresy. They convicted him, and Gray dictated he could not take his appeal to anyone except the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Colenso appealed to the Privy Council instead. And so the second Privy Council decision against Bishop Gray, so Colenso and Gray right there, effectively, Colenso won this case. Bishop Gray had no authority to depose Colenso, so the deprivation of ministry was null and void in the Privy Council's eyes, and the Anglican churches lacked any coercive jurisdiction unless created by statute. So the impact from this confirmed limits on episcopal authority in the colonies and accelerated the development of independent Anglican provinces. And that is kind of where the Anglican Communion started, or became more necessary to understand. Because after these two decisions, which stated that bishops of the Church of England outside of England do not have legal authority because it's an association of religious people, effectively, they needed to make their own churches, to make their own internal legal rules, or maybe not legal rules, canonical rules, to have some sort of authority within them, but they could no longer assume that they had the same authority as they did in England. So, with all of that, Archbishop Charles Longley of Canterbury called for all Anglican and Episcopal bishops to meet at Canterbury to kind of address these numerous reasons. The Church of England's relationship with colonial churches around the world from these two Privy Council decisions, the calls of the American bishops to further understand what is our relationship to you, and this Colenso controversy. So they sent letters to 144 bishops. Only 76 came. Not even the Archbishop of York. He did not even come. And many bishop suffragans. So a suffragan is a bishop elected in a diocese, but does not have the diocesan authority within the diocese. But they can do confirmations, help, and work with a bishop. And if a bishop leaves or dies in office, the suffragan is not automatically the diocesan. But many of them did not come.
I have a logistical question.
Yes.
So they sent letters out to all these bishops. How long did it take them to assemble to this conference or whatever conference?
Yeah, I think letters went. Yeah, I mean, I think so the question was, logistically, how long did it take to set this up? I think they sent letters by the end of 1865.
Mike and I were talking about how just the communication
Oh.
of like getting everything, back in that day.
Put a letter on a boat goes across the ocean.
At least by this time, all of that was probably more likely to make it. I mean, there was constant trade and constant boats going between the colonies around the world, and to England. So I think by 1860, it was probably easier than any other point in human history. But Longley desired to not make this conference a general synod, so a synod for the Anglican Church or the Anglican Communion, and wanted to see it as a communion of churches. And there's this spirit of pan-Anglicanism. Pan things seem to be very prevalent at the end of the 19th century, like Pan-Africanism. I guess that's more 20th century. But this broader understanding of what it means to be Anglican and expand that. And some of the outcomes, Colenso, they adopted a resolution deploring the situation and offered suggestions if Colenso was deposed eventually, but claimed no authority in removing him. So they deliberately took a step in not enforcing doctrine because they felt they had no authority to enforce said doctrine. Yep.
So when the people didn't attend, was it like a boycott or was it intentional? I'm not very good.
Yeah.
It
I mean,
wasn't just, I'm sorry, I have, family emergency.
uh,
I can't make it.
they thought it would make things more confusing.
Okay.
Seemed to be the gist of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did both clergy from the north and south of the United States attend? I mean, it was following the Civil War.
I mean, we got back together. So the question was, did both North and South clergy attend? We stitched ourselves back together really shortly after the war ended. I mean, like 6 months.
Okay.
Quite possibly wrongly too. Yeah, so I do believe North and Southern bishops did attend. I couldn't find a full list of all the Americans that attended, but it was about 18 Americans did attend. And I don't know if you can see the cursor, but this guy right here is John Henry Hopkins. He did attend. He was the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church at the time. So they took no action on Colenso. They encouraged colonial churches to form their own synod and councils and to start the process of becoming their own independent Anglican church. And they set forth further gatherings of bishops. And this is a picture of all, I think I only counted 72. Maybe someone moved. Yeah, I mean, this was a time where pictures took 5 minutes. Like you can see some of their faces are blurry because they turned their head. But this is a picture of all the bishops back in 1867. So it's a picture of the first Lambeth Conference. So the Lambeth Conference of 1888. This is the third. I forgot to put that at the top. This was the third Lambeth Conference called. It was called by Archbishop Edward White Benson. And at this point, 145 bishops attended. So the fear of making things confusing was subsided substantially by this point. I mean, by the second, 10 years later, they were hosting them about every 10 years.
So was it just called when they went into Cullen, or was it just?
No, I mean, they were quite intentional about making it about every decade.
Yeah.
They would call one.
1867,
It was
78.
Well, it was 11 years between 67 and 78. And so at this point, they started to have a lot more conversation and committee work as bishops, kind of trying to seek some sort of understanding, best practices about all the various social concerns going on in the world. So that's supposed to be intemperance. Oops.
That's a deep subject right there at the top.
Yep, because the temperance movement was in full swing. Purity, divorce, polygamy, socialism, care for immigrants, mutual relationships of the diocese in the Anglican Communion, home reunion, which is the process of churches in England returning to the Church of England, i.e. believes that the Wesleyan Church, the United Church of England, the Methodist churches coming back to England, what would that look like? And the relationship with other churches like the Scandi churches, Scandinavian, I call them Scandi for short, Old Catholics, etc. These were all churches in which they recognized some sort of historic episcopacy and an uninterrupted line of bishops. How would that look for us to engage with them? The most important thing to come out of the Third Lambeth Conference was this agreement called the Chicago-Lambeth Quadrilateral. It was first adopted and approved by the Episcopal Church at our General Convention in 1886 in Chicago. And then it was offered to all the bishops at Lambeth, and they all agreed to adopt it as our method of understanding what makes someone Anglican and how do we engage with churches who are not Anglican, but what makes them necessary to be part of the true Catholic faith. And so here is the quadrilateral. There are 4 points, quadrilateral. The first one, Scripture. The Holy Scriptures of the Old and New Testaments as containing all things necessary to salvation and as being the rule and ultimate standard of faith. Creeds. The Apostles' Creed as the baptismal creed and symbol, and the Nicene Creed as a sufficient statement of the Christian faith. Belief in the sacraments. 2 sacraments ordained by Christ himself, baptism and the Supper of the Lord, ministered with unfailing use of Christ's words of institution. This is my body, do this in remembrance of me. This is my blood, do this in remembrance of me. Those are the words of institution. And the elements ordained by him. Note, this is only saying you have to believe that these 2 are ordained by Christ. It does not limit the number of sacraments. We have brought back all 7 sacraments, if not more. The Orthodox Church does not limit sacraments to 7. And then the historic episcopacy. The historic episcopate locally adapted in the methods of its administration to the varying needs of the nations and peoples called of God into the unity of his church. There are probably questions.
What are the other sacraments other than the 7?
Ministry to the sick, so anointing of the sick. Confession.
No, other than the norm. Other than
Oh. At least in the Orthodox tradition, they see anything that imparts grace is a sacrament. So,
for example,
I mean, maybe like the imposition of ashes, they might consider that to be a sacrament for us. I mean, by no means, it's a liturgical ritual that we do, but historically, the Western Church has not considered that a sacrament. But if you feel like it grants you something to do it, then yeah, one could argue that that is a sacrament. The Orthodox agree with all of our 7 sacraments, but they generally don't understand why we limit them. At least my understanding from seminary and such. So I would say the most important thing from this quadrilateral, and the one that gets the most confusing and necessary, is the historic episcopacy. So when this was adopted by Lambeth and by us, this was our method of stating for us to be in full communion with someone, all 4 of these need to be met. And the historic episcopacy gets harder, is the hardest thing for people to meet most of the time. For a brief example, when we entered our full communion agreement with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, they were a merger of like 5 different Lutheran denominations. Some had bishops, some did not. But their bishops were elected by people but did not have the historic nature. They could not trace their lineage down to an apostle, of which our bishops can. So as a kind of concession we had to make with the ELCA, all current bishops had the same authority as they did, but for any future presiding or any future bishop in the ELCA church required at least one Episcopal bishop to be present for the next 30 or 40 years for us to enter in full communion. So we are giving the ELCA church their historic episcopacy. Sometimes there are churches that have a historic episcopacy and we can see its lineage, and the communion agreements are much easier. So the Moravian church, they have bishops, they do a slightly different ritual, but we were okay with their slightly different ritual because they do handshake as their ordination rather than laying upon heads. But they would have 3 bishops handshake the new bishop. So we were like, that is sufficient. You're keeping the line of succession that you had and claimed when you all broke off and became your own church. I don't know the general theology of Moravians or their history, but I know they're from the Czech Republic area.
So, that's so interesting to me. So, this insistence on this lineage sounds so traditionally biblical too, and coming all the way down from David to Jesus. I mean, it seems to be almost the same kind of thinking in line of fulfillment of things. I mean, I'm just trying to think of, besides tradition, the real purpose of keeping the lineage there. And it does seem to me almost to tie it back biblically,
So the comment was made of, it seems interesting that we are so fastidious maybe about this, of why we need that lineage. And partially it's that is our understanding of what a bishop is. The bishops are the keepers of the faith. They're the ones who are to ensure proper doctrine, to ensure the faith as passed down by the apostles is retained. And so knowing the 3 people who consecrated you a bishop and the 3 people who consecrated those 3 people bishops all the way down to what apostle they came from is important to show this uninterrupted lineage of succession.
There's authority. I mean,
Yeah.
Jesus' authority coming from John the Baptist, but also going back to David and when you listen to when it's Matthew that starts with
Genealogy, yeah.
The genealogy, it seems very to me, it just kind of struck me that there's a similarity in when you're talking about the authority that seems like it's all part of the same tradition, which is fascinating.
I guess one communion, so we use the term full communion when we recognize the full legitimacy in another church's sacraments. So what you're doing at your table, we considered valid. So we're that way with the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. But we're currently in communion talks with the United Methodist Church. They had to put it on stall because of their own breakup. But the question of the historic episcopacy is also being brought up. It's slightly different, I would say, with the Methodists because the EOCA and the Methodists have been in communion longer, or have been in communion. And so in turn, they're actually giving the Methodist bishops their own historic episcopacy, because we have given it to the Lutherans. So I don't think it would be as hard. So I could see in the next couple of years, probably the next general convention, we would approve a full communion rite with the Methodists. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the Apostles' Creed as a symbol of baptism versus the Nicene Creed as a statement of faith. When in the service today do we always say the Nicene.
Yeah,
When do we say the Apostles' Creed?
at baptisms.
That's the only time?
I mean, you also say it every daily office.
Yeah.
You say the Apostles' Creed at the office. But like you are baptized, you affirm the Apostles' Creed whenever you do a baptism or reaffirm your own baptism. I guess it's a belief that that is the creed the apostles had. The Nicene Creed was expanding our understanding of what the faith was, and that is sufficient. And the sole reason why we say it in service was basically a correcting and to prevent heresy from like 400, to ensure that priests and the laity knew the correct faith. Irrelevant and like its placement right after the sermon was poignant for that.
So does the Book of Common Prayer doesn't come into this? Do the Methodists use the same?
Nope.
They don't have that, so it doesn't come into, that's just choice then, you don't have to be part of.
Well, I mean, today, the Scottish Episcopal Church does not have a Book of Common Prayer. They tried to start one in 1637, but there's riots. Books of Common Prayer are apparently quite, yes, even for us today, they're quite controversial things to make. So, I mean, I know some clergy who still don't use the 79. They use the 28 prayer book. So anyway, prayer books, well, generally can be assumed that every Anglican church has one. That's not the case because the Scottish Episcopal doesn't. They have some approved liturgies. They had a like history of making these things called wee bookies, little books, that would have like services in them, and so they kind of kept up the tradition of the wee bookies. I think they're still called the wee bookies. It's fun to say, isn't it? Wee bookies. I would say the next big push in really defining the Anglican Church and the Anglican Communion came with the Seventh Lambeth Conference in 1930. It was called by Archbishop Cosmo Gordon Lang. Cosmo as a first name is so cool. Yep. But 308 bishops were present for this one. There's numerous resolutions, I think 96 in total, passed by the bishops. This is a picture of all the bishops right there. And it's stated the major one for that was Resolution 49. The Anglican Communion is a fellowship within the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of those duly constituted dioceses, provinces, and regional churches in communion with the See of Canterbury. There are three things in common. They uphold and propagate the Catholic and Apostolic faith and order as they are generally set forth in the Book of Common Prayer as authorized in their several churches. Again, that's where Scotland kind of gets some leeway. I guess their wee bookies were considered their BCP at the time. They are particular or national churches, and as such promote within each of their territories a national expression of the Christian faith, life, and worship. They are bound together by mutual loyalty, sustained through the common council of the bishops in conference. So here is where one could say the full understanding of what it means to be Anglican kind of came about was the Lambeth Conference of 1930, so the seventh one. And so the communion today, we are more or less the third largest denomination. There are 47 provinces. So they're not called churches in the communion. They're all called independent provinces of the Anglican Church. So we are the American province. I put air quotes because we also have, I want to say Honduras, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Cuba, Taiwan. That one's weird. They didn't like Hong Kong getting buddy-buddy with China, so they left and joined us. But there's about 110 million people who are adherents or are Anglicans, and about 60% of them are African. The communion today has 4 instruments of communion, as they're called, the Lambeth Conference. So every decade conference of bishops, the Archbishop of Canterbury themselves. I'm happy I have to say themselves now, too. We have our first female Archbishop of Canterbury. It's no longer himself. The primates meeting, so that is happens more regularly, and it's a meeting of all of the primates of all the provinces, and the Anglican Consultative Council. This is the only part of the communion that has lay people attending, and they almost require people from smaller churches to attend. And they do dictate, if you can only send one person to the ACC for short, that you send a lay person. And they meet in between both the primate meetings and the Lambeth Conference and meet more frequently, kind of continuing to build relationships and how we can best work together more effectively. The last Lambeth was in 2022. Justin Welby called it. There were 660 bishops present, was down from the previous one called by Rowan Williams. Notably, Nigeria did not attend. That is the biggest province in the Anglican Communion. They're still annoyed over various things. We'll get into that. And Welby delayed this conference. It should have been called in 2018. But he wanted to go to every single province and meet with every single primate in their province before he called the next Lambeth conference. He completed that in 2018, but a pesky pandemic kind of pushed any things of meeting. But so this is a picture of the women bishops at the last Lambeth conference, noticeably bigger than the one in 2008. There's only about 10 in that picture. And there's a lot more diversity as well. A lot more provinces have approved not just women's ordination, but also women's consecration to the episcopacy. And this is Welby at the, I believe, concluding service in Canterbury Cathedral, and that is Archbishop Thabo Makaba. He is the Archbishop of Cape Town, and Welby asked him to kind of do a lot of the planning for this service. Current issues. The biggest one that still causes the most maybe consternation is human sexuality. There's usually resolutions at Lambeth Conference that try to reaffirm traditional views of marriage and the nature of human sexuality. but I would say of the 660 that attended, there was a sizable chunk that disagreed with the resolution, which is very uncommon most of the time. But the fact that so many provinces agreed to meet still, despite some of other provinces in the West, i.e. us mostly, was still seen as a great success and important. To a certain extent, women's ordination is still a particular issue, especially since the Archbishop of Canterbury is now a woman. There are 3 provinces in which women are completely barred from any sort of ministry, Nigeria being one of them. 5 do not allow women priests, but would allow deacons. I guess there is some overlap, and about 14 do not allow women bishops. So even if they were fine with women being priests, the fact that we have women bishops is a big enough barrier that has caused some issues. I would say another issue is what makes a province Anglican. So there is a separate group that is trying to define what being Anglican is, and that is the Global Fellowship of Confessing Anglicans, or GAFCON for short. And there's this big push, I believe in July of this year, that GAFCON is pushing to meet in Nairobi or Kigali. They may have already met in Kigali. But specifically after the appointment of Sarah Malali as Archbishop, that they claim the communion is dead, and that GAFCON will become the true bearers of what it means to be Anglican. So they put out this big appeal to all provinces who were in the Anglican communion to join them. As of right now, no one has agreed to that. That's as of right now. I haven't heard any update from it, but some churches have already stated that they're not attending that GAFCON. Like, that is a step too far, like Congo, for instance. And then
So the appointment of Sarah Malali, is that to the,
Archbishop of
I thought
Canterbury.
you said though in an earlier class that she was not, it wasn't like final, that she was.
As of last week, or a week and a half ago, it was.
Oh, it was probably like the first class.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So like right now, she is legally the Archbishop of Canterbury, but not spiritually. She has not been enthroned yet. That's March 25th. So if you want to watch it, it starts at 3 a.m. our time. It's literally her sitting in a chair. That's the extent of the enthronement ceremony.
I think we're good.
I mean, I'm going to get up at 3 a.m. to watch her sit in a chair, because I think it's cool. And they usually play it up with a ton of different communion celebrations added as well. So it's not just English service, but they'll have probably representation from across the provinces there. Another question is, does the communion have power to reprimand another province for non-doctrinal actions? Quite notably, the 2016 primates meeting punished the Episcopal Church because of our General Convention's approval of same-sex marriage rights, where we defined marriage as between two people rather than a man and a woman. The punishment was being barred for like 5 years, and that came and went. No one did anything after that. Welby only did it because that's what the primates wanted, but he didn't muster up any other opposition after all of our punishment ceased. But was that allowed normally in the Anglican Communion? One could question. Who has authority? What's the authority of the communion? What's the authority of the Bible? Local provinces, where does authority lie is constantly a question. What does unity look like in the Anglican Communion? Or what is the difference between unity and conformity? And then what is traditional Anglican theology, interpretation, hymnody, etc. I guess I will explain some of these pictures because I think they hint, at least quite possibly at the last question. So up here, right next to the title, these are the archbishops of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Polynesia. So it is the Anglican Church of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and Polynesia, and they have a unique system in which there are 3 primates. All can use the term archbishop, and all have to be in agreement together. It's kind of their post-colonial understanding of what does it mean to be our version of Anglican Church here. It is to have equal representation of the Maori, the English descendants, and the Polynesians. So that is their own adaptation of the historic episcopacy, is to have a share of primacy. This is a picture of the last Lambeth Conference. You see the bishops and their significant others right there. This is the new primate of Japan. And then this is a woman who is getting ordained in Kenya, I want to say. So that's it. What are your questions? What does it mean to be communion?
Nigeria did not attend the conference. How significant, what portion of the 60% of Africans does Nigeria make? It's a big country.
They're like 7 million strong in Nigeria. They work a lot with GAFCON. What almost became a bigger issue with the Church of Nigeria was our election of Catherine Jefferts Shorey as the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. They did not agree with the consecration of Jean Robinson, the first openly gay bishop in the Anglican Communion. But he wasn't married, so that seemed slightly okay, even though he was in a partnership at the time. Catherine Jefferts Shorey seemed to cause a lot more issues in the Episcopal Church and with churches like the Church of Nigeria. So much so that Nigeria would send bishops to ordain people in the United States, which is a really big taboo within the communion, because they did not have permission to do so. So they are the biggest province, but with 110 million, we would still be the biggest or third biggest denomination at 103. So.
Can we ask what it means to you? What question you asked us?
Refer to page 1.
We have that part here.
I mean, I guess for me, it is finding the middle way between the traditional origins of the church, but also the local culture. I get really flustered sometimes with certain Episcopal priests who claim a very strict sense of what it means to do Eucharist or what is good music or stuff like that. I preached one, I guess, homilette at a service at St. John the Divine with Sarah Coakley. You probably don't know her name, but she is currently the quintessential Anglican theologian. She has a short essay, volume 1, that's 2,500 pages on human sexuality. She calls it a very short essay on human sexuality, I think almost mockingly, and it's volume 1 and it's 2,500 pages. Anyway, she is from England, and I made her chuckle when I was like, I get really flustered with people thinking that only stuffy English hymns are the only correct hymns. And she full blown laughed. I'm like, yes, I made a theologian laugh. But anyway, I guess for me, the thing that I find most traditional is how adaptive our faith and our tradition is. I've worshiped in Anglican provinces or from people from different Anglican provinces literally around the world, in South Africa, in New York, in 3 or 4 different congregations with Bahamian people, with Dominican people, Puerto Rican. So I love how our tradition allows people to still retain who they are as a people and still find what is most pleasing to God in the same time.
Common threads.
Yeah. One thing this was the one time the Episcopal Church was not a horrible colonial church. We also weren't the worst horrible colonial church when we went west, but we also weren't great. Hawaii, the monarchy of Hawaii loved the Anglican Church and asked for England to send them a bishop to start the Church of Hawaii because King Kamehameha and Queen Emma found it as the only church that would allow Hawaiians to still be Hawaiians and not assimilate into their church. They could adapt the faith to fit the Hawaiian culture. And King Kamehameha wrote the prayer book in Hawaiian. So when we took it over, because it was no longer a British protectorate or an independent kingdom that Britain was supporting, and we led a coup d'etat to overthrow the monarchy, the English bishops handed over the Church of Hawaii to us because we were now the province to take it over. And this was, 1900, so our understanding of the communion was more developed by that point. The bishop asked, and it was granted, that we protect the monarchy. They were no longer in power, but, do not allow the American government to harm or do anything to the Hawaiian monarchy. So we have seen it as kind of our own duty to protect them during that time. So we protected Queen Lily and stuff like that. Oh, no. As I said, it was the one time where the country was a horrible colonial power. And the church was no, we're going to keep what you all asked for this church. So we were not the horrible colonial church. We actually did something right. Not always true in our westward expansion and our colonial imperialism of the late 19th century. That's all I have.
Lord.